This photograph captures a Palestinian village operating under the strict control of foreign soldiers. For a long time, this was the baseline reality across much of the Arab world. Everyday citizens passively living within borders and systems designed entirely by distant outside powers. Look closely at the people gathered around this radio. To understand the massive global shifts affecting their own streets, entire populations had to wait for singular, scheduled broadcasts, like the afternoon news from the BBC. Compare that slow, scheduled past to our present reality. Today, we are hit with a relentless flood of fragmented headlines and overlapping crises. The sheer volume of information leaves the public deeply confused about who is actually pulling the levers of power. This confusion exists because the mechanics of national security are tightly hoarded by the ruling elite. When leaders treat strategy as a state secret, an uninformed public naturally fills the void with conspiracy theories to make sense of the chaos. We can begin to decode this system by looking at it through a lens of 4 distinct pillars, starting with geography. Mastering this geopolitical equation is the only way we stop being pawns on someone else's board. To prove exactly how this theory works in practice, we have to examine the ultimate historical test case, Russia. This 3D globe illustrates the sheer physical scale of the Russian landmass. Covering 17 million square kilometers, it is roughly double the size of the United States and completely dwarfs massive nations like China and India. This image shows commercial icebreakers struggling through a thick frozen harbor. Despite holding the largest landmass on Earth, Russia suffers a severe geographic handicap. Its northern and eastern ports freeze solid for months out of the year, crippling its global trade and naval operations. This icy reality creates an inescapable national objective. To survive as a global power, Russia is permanently driven to secure and defend access to warm water ports that operate year-round. On land, the country faces a second massive vulnerability. Its western border is a vast, flat expanse with 0 natural geographical barriers. It is an open highway inviting European armies to invade. This photograph of freezing soldiers, their eyelashes coated in ice, reveals the brutal reality of that Western geography. Time and again, invading armies, like those of Napoleon and Hitler, have pushed across those flat plains, only to be swallowed by the massive depth of the Russian interior and decimated by the extreme winter. Because you cannot negotiate with terrain or climate, Russian geography guarantees a permanent state of strategic paranoia. They must constantly push westward to build defensive buffer zones and push southward to reach the oceans. That geographic paranoia forms the second pillar of our equation, historical memory. The ideological flag waving over the capital may change, but the geographic imperatives dictate the exact same strategy generation after generation. Centuries ago, Peter the Great, the first emperor of Russia, issued decrees aggressively pushing the empire southward, seeking direct naval access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. This is a portrait of Joseph Stalin. As a Marxist communist leading the Soviet Union, his political worldview was entirely distinct from the old czars. Yet he pursued the exact same geographic objectives, fighting to expand Soviet influence toward the very same warm water routes. Looking at modern Russia under Vladimir Putin, the pattern repeats. He leads a nationalist state, but his foreign policy is still driven by that identical historical need to secure southern waters and western buffers. This photo highlights the Bosphorus Strait, a highly trafficked channel in Turkey, the only waterway connecting the Black Sea to the rest of the globe. For centuries, this tight geographic bottleneck has frustrated Russian expansion, keeping them in a tense, permanent dance with whoever controls it. Historical memory turns temporary tactics into a permanent national destiny. Modern conflicts in this region follow the same geographic logic that has governed this land for centuries. This image of the Sevastopol port displays docked Russian naval ships. Applying our equation makes immediate sense of modern headlines. The annexation of Crimea was a calculated maneuver to secure a fully operational, year-round warm water port directly on the Black Sea. With that port secured, we see lines of Russian warships, like the ones in this photo, effectively projecting military power far beyond their borders and out into Mediterranean waters. This photograph shows fighters standing on a destroyed jet in Libya. Because Turkey controls that vital Bosphorus bottleneck, Russia and Turkey are locked in a complex balancing act, fighting each other through proxy militias in places like Libya to test each other's boundaries. In response, we see weapons like this parked Turkish Bayraktar drone. A drone is an unmanned, remote-controlled aircraft, and Turkey uses them extensively in shared proxy zones, like Ukraine and Libya, to efficiently counter Russian armored advancements. When the news reports that Russia and Turkey are actively trading defense systems while simultaneously bombing each other's proxies, it looks like chaos. In reality, it is a highly rational, predictable negotiation dictated by the hard constraints of the map. Now let's apply this framework to the Arab world. While geography and history are fixed, our equation has a third pillar: sudden disruptions. These are the wild cards, like extreme climate events or massive, unexpected oil discoveries, that force a nation to rapidly adapt. As shown in this graphic, the fourth and final pillar is national vision, the strategic compass required to navigate those sudden disruptions. But across much of the Arab world, that compass needle is spinning aimlessly. Global superpowers operate on clear, centuries-old objectives, but regionally, our strategic compass is clouded by heavy fog. We lack a unified direction to protect our own interests when the map shifts. We can no longer afford to leave the mechanics of national security isolated as an elite secret. Geopolitical awareness has to be democratized. Citizens must understand these forces just as clearly as the politicians who govern them. By adopting this cold, predictable framework, we stop being passive observers reacting to the news. We can pierce the fog of conspiracy theories, hold our systems accountable, and finally chart a self-determined course for the future.